in their God. I want us to look at that for a little while this morning. In the first place, the Hebrew children trusted in God's person. What kind of person was God to the Hebrew children? What kind of person is He to you this morning? Well, to the Hebrew children, I notice first of all, He loved them. He loved them, dear God, because they said He will deliver us from your hand, O King. He loved them. They trusted in a God of love. And not only that, but they said He will deliver us from your hand. They trusted in a faithful God. He was faithful. In fact, the crowning attribute of God is His faithfulness above everything else. You remember what Jeremiah said over in the book of Lamentations, the 3rd chapter, when he says over there, he says, because of your great love, we are not consumed. Your compassions are new every morning, or your mercies are new every morning. Your compassions, he said, are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. God is faithful. And you remember the Apostle Paul over in 2 Timothy, the 2nd chapter, verse 13. He said, even if we're faithless, He remains faithful, for He cannot disown Himself. Wow. It's His crowning attribute. God is a faithful God. He can be trusted. He'll keep His word. He'll come through. Wow. Well, Pastor Doug Forsberg said one night about it was in the morning, it was about 3 a.m. in the morning. It was a January, bone-chilling morning, about 10 degrees. He received a call from the city jail. A man called him down there. This fellow had gone to his church just occasionally. He was in jail. But he said, you know, Pastor, I've really got a problem. He said, I'm in jail. But he said, my worst problem is my roommate was drunk and he took my 2 little children. One of them was 2 and one of them was 4. He took them. And he had a wreck and ran into a tree, and I don't know how they're doing, and I don't know. I need somehow to find out about my 2 little children. And so the pastor said, I'll be down. He got dressed and went down to the jail. We'll see what we can do. But when he got there, the 2 little children were already in the jail cell with their dad. And what had happened was the ambulance had picked up these little girls, 2 and 4-year-old, and they'd found out where the daddy was and brought them down to the jail. The police were in a quandary. What are we going to do to these kids? Their dad's in jail. What are we going to do? So Pastor Doug Forsberg and his wife said, we'll take them temporarily. We'll watch after them until something better can take place. So they took them out to the car. Can you imagine these little kids, especially the 40-year-old that was beginning to understand stuff? Here her dad was in jail. She had been in a car wreck with a drunk man. And now then, she's going to get in another car with a stranger. Can you imagine? He took this little 4-year-old, put her in the back seat, and was buckling her in. She looked up through those beautiful brown eyes and said, can you drive? The central issue for this little girl was trust. Could she trust after what she'd been through? Could she trust this man? That's a central issue for each one of us. That's the meaning of life. Can we trust God? That's the big issue. Can can I trust God? And he said to her, yes, darling, I can drive. Wow. He can drive. He can drive. God's person can be trusted. But let's look again. Not only did they trust God's person, but they trusted God's power. Notice what it says. That's what's beautiful this morning, talking about how big God is. Notice here, they said, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, and the God we serve is able to save us from it." He's able to save us from it if we're thrown into it. How big was the God of these three Hebrews? How big is your God today? How big is your God? How big is my God today? I like to ask myself that question occasionally. He was a great professor, Dr. Robert Wilson, in Princeton Theological Seminary. And one of his students were coming back. He'd been away for 12 years. He'd graduated. He's a preacher boy. And after 12 years, he's coming back to preach in Miller Chapel. And old Dr. Robert Wilson went to chapel that morning. He went down and sat right down close. He's sort of a strange old professor, but had good sense. He sat right down and he wanted to hear this preacher. And the preacher preached. After it's over, old Dr. Wilson went up, shook hands with him. He said, "If you come back, I will not come back to hear you." He said, "I only come once." He said, "I come to see whether you are a little Goddard or a big Goddard." The pastor, preacher boy said, What do you mean? What do you mean by that?" Well, he said, some preachers and people have a little God. He cannot perform miracles. He cannot inspire holy scriptures. He is not strong in behalf of his people. They have a little God. But he said, some have a great God. They said, he can inspire the scriptures. He can perform miracles. He is strong in behalf of his people. And he said, "Reverend, I want to tell you, you have a great God. And God's going to bless your ministry." He smiled at him, shook his hand, and turned and walked out. How big is my God? How big is your God today? He was a big God. Those Hebrew children said, "Our God is able to rescue us from your hand." In God we trust. But again, I noticed that the Hebrew children trusted in God's plan. Now this may be the best part of the whole scripture here. It's one of my favorites. He says, "And he will rescue us from your hand, O king." But these words then, wow. "But even if he does not." But even if he does not. They trusted in God's plan. In God's plan. They said, "We don't know what his plan is. We know that he loves us. We know that he's faithful. We believe he's going to deliver us from this. But we don't know. But even if he does not, even if he does not, we trust what God's plan is." Well, why is that? Why? Because they thought God knows what's good for us, and God knows what's bad for us. And the real truth is, the only one who knows what's good for you